we called the chair's pick. I mean, basically, what was happening through the programming was the programming was getting so full that I was running out of capacity to put content in, which I thought was just broadly interesting. And it feels like as we get to lunchtime, we need a little bit of a sit back and a review of what's going on in the sector. And I've asked man of the moment, Alex Davies. Alex, are you out there? Let's see if we can get your camera live. There's always doing the dance. Let's have a look. If we click that. And
check, might check.
Here he comes. Yep. Have we got a camera as well, Alex?
Hang on. Start video. There we go. Hi, everybody.
That's what we need. Brilliant. How are you, sir?
I'm pretty good, thanks. How you doing?
Yeah, good. Man of the moment. Now we saw. For those of you that tuned into the CDNA launch last week, Alex was on there giving a very interesting presentation about distributed CDNs and so on. So this session is meant to be a little bit of a moment to sit back and think about the industry. Alex, to help us do that, give us a big picture about macro trends you're seeing in the CDN sector. Your presentation was very interesting and you've got a lot of bases covered there, but tell me what your big picture macro trends that you're seeing now.
Well, thankfully I can chat to you from a desk today instead of a car. So yes, things have gone more smoothly today. But I guess the macro trend, if you take a step back from the CDN world, as part of Rethink TV, we're always sort of taking a look at the ratio of broadband lines to pay TV subs, and it's quite telling that the gap between them, has passed. Like there's more broadband than pay TV now, has been for a couple of years, and the gap is getting a lot wider. And especially in like our forecast periods, it goes from like neck and neck essentially to like a ratio of sort of 2 to 1, and that means that you can't rely on satellite dishes and cable networks to deliver video now, and it means that the CDN networks are going to be under sort of continued pressure, not just from the growth of like internet users, but also just that the however many hours per day per user that you could traditionally think of as satellite or broadcast or cable, that's now being served via the general internet infrastructure. I think we saw signs already that infrastructure is under a bit of pressure during the sort of the early stages of the lockdowns, when we were seeing these SVOD suppliers throttling bit rates preemptively. I don't think anything fell over. I can't remember there being a big outage there, but that suggests that we're not far away from like a peak, and it would only take like one like problematic outage to sort of, I think, fail cascade a lot of other stuff. And then I guess like in a related fashion, as people are moving from using their sort of television as the primary means of like video consumption, they might still use the TV screen, but way back 20 years before I was born, there might have been like 3 or 5 channels, and you could really optimize that delivery system because it was so kind of streamlined and centralized. But now we've gone from single digit to dozens, hundreds of TV channels. Probably, I think it's 5-figure thousands now. But at the same time, all of these internet-based sources for video mean that the shape of the audience is not segmented very well. It's not channel stripes that you can view vertically. It's this mad mess of stuff, and as well, it's heavily kind of time shifted. So you then have to support lots more but smaller audiences that are increasingly wanting to watch live video. So it's just a very different market, and I don't think that. Well, I mean, it's impossible for us to model, but I don't think enough people like kind of consider that sort of generational shift that's happening. And you see little bits of evidence like all the time, like millennials like me get into corporate work environments and not understanding like folder structures, and like you view that as like absolute table stakes. Like where is this? Oh, it's in this folder. Oh, what folder? So like while that's happening, like that's the next generation of like video consumers, and they're just going to find it like almost alien to think of like a TV channel, because they'll move to sort of app based or sort of service based viewing and browsing and whatnot. And the backbone of all those video services is CDN. So I think I probably waffled for long enough.
Oh no, it's good.
Well.
It's good. I wanted to ask. So as you're sort of making some comments about new generation and new behaviour and so on there. So um, you guys presumably monitor broadcast TV and traditional TV as much as you're observing streaming. Is the herd moving, or is it a new herd emerging? Do you think is the younger audience actually moving off linear traditional broadcast onto streaming only, or
Yeah.
are they, or is this a growth of an audience that's happened? Do you think?
I think the younger people are less likely to sit down in front of a television and browse for content. They might fire up an app and still use the TV as the central screen, and then you get into the whole argument about second screening and whatnot, and whether people are actually watching. And I mean, the advertising industry is like tearing itself apart, like with that discussion. But the audience is growing. Like within within a developed economy, it's not growing. Like there's a fixed amount of people, and they already watch a lot of video. The shift there is that instead of spending the most time watching it on TV, they'll shift to watching it on mobile devices. That's kind of happening. And then similarly, the stuff they watch is shifting. In the emerging markets, you have like new internet users, like users that have never used the internet before, or similarly ones that are tangentially using internet services but via like feature phones. Eventually, they start getting video capable smartphones, which will be like comically underpowered compared to what we're used to. But suddenly you've got several billion potential new video users, and it doesn't take all that much to sort of come to the fore. And you can kind of look at some of the kind of financial and banking services that are emerging in parts of Africa. They've like completely jumped ahead of like the path that we took to get to mobile banking, and they've sort of gone a few steps further. So like that sort of stuff will happen in video. So like if people in the sort of developing world, I mean that's a slightly patronizing term, I think, but those types aren't gonna get a smartphone and they go, oh, you know what would be really nice, like a TV and a sofa and a set top, and like I'll put an antenna on my house. Like that won't happen. But then I mean, the other part is that the broadcast infrastructure that's already been deployed, like you could do quite a lot with that in terms of caching, but I don't know if that's something that there's much enthusiasm for. But I mean, it's there, and it would be nice to use it. And the likes of Arqiva in the UK would be quite keen to see that assets value increase. But yeah, I mean, on the one side, the emerging markets, it's that these people watch video. It's just what kind. And then the emerging markets, it's like the growth of a completely new user base. So,
very interesting, and it's. I think it takes us into the world of what the content is, which is also possibly a bit of a blurred line for Content Delivery Summit. We try to stay away from what the actual content is because we like to be under the hood rather than on top of it, I think, to some extent. That said, I was very keen in the previous panel, the discussion about the SK Telecom net neutrality issues. I think that's a can of worms which cyclically gets opened up. I've got some fairly strong views and insights on what's happening there, but I do think that we do see this from time to time. We see the access networks trying to charge the OTT providers for providing access to the content. We also see the content providers shrugging their shoulders and saying, well, it's your subscribers who want the content. So there's an interesting duality of battles that emerge there. And I think that, that there's going to be, I think it'll be a long time before we see a ubiquitous charge for distribution across access networks, because I think content providers will at some point cross their arms and say, fine, we'll just turn you off then. But who knows? So let's get back onto the tech side of things. Let's talk about some of the tech that you're tracking and that you're seeing emerging a little bit. You talked, I'm going to jump straight into the one you talked about at the CDNA environment, the DCDN. You've got a report out on it at the moment. Let's start with that, and then we'll drill into some of the more esoteric technologies as we go. But tell us a little bit about the DCDN, what the report's been about, and what you're watching there.
So the genesis of this, so Rethink TV does, like, it's an annual service. So like last year we looked at multi-CDN, which was to try and gauge the splits between public CDN, private CDN. We're also interested in like WebRTC as CDN offload, and also for like pure WebRTC services that would be like a kind of an actual rival to public and private CDN workloads. So that was last year's project, and then in the year that kind of followed, we heard and at the time people had said a lot about P2P, and we sort of gone, well, let's just focus on this, and then we'll return. And in that year, we had a lot of sort of inquiries and interest from like customers and a few like people who wanted to pitch themselves that decentralized CDN or distributed CDN was worth looking at. And when it came to kind of refreshing the multi CDN forecast, we decided we'd sit down and take a good look at this. And I'm sure most people here will sort of have their own definitions, but for us, like public CDN is like multi-tenant CDN, private CDN is a single tenant, and then the pure WebRTC was, well, what if I just don't use traditional CDN infrastructure? I use like a WebRTC based alternative, and that comes in down the line. But the decentralized CDN, if we're saying that public and private are multi or single tenant, they're still controlled by one centralized CDN provider. If just the alphabetical example, Akamai is still in charge of that single network, and then at some point it hands off to the regular consumer-facing ISPs or mobile networks, and then they take it from there. And sure, you can do a lot of stuff inside those networks as well, which I think we touched on in the previous panel a bit. But the decentralized CDNs, instead of that single CDN provider handling that network from kind of one end to another, the point there is that as part of the introduction of Web 3.0, which I might need to explain, we shift from a single provider doing all of the work to the single providers essentially being more like marketplaces, and they're able to commission and incentivize third parties to deploy the CDN functions as applications on their own infrastructure to do better sort of quality of service, quality of experience, or just to have it as a cheaper alternative. Because there's a lot of arguments that if you can get the local business on the business park to fire up one of these servers, you can then suddenly serve the neighboring housing estates for like a fraction of the cost that you might have to if you were trying to do things from like the regional AWS center, or the equivalent that way. So that's the shift. Do you want me to go through Web 1.0, 2.0?
Do it. You mentioned it.
Yeah. Okay. So the 1.0 stuff, that was the very early days. It was single computers serving text, and then within that realm, we evolved to sort of on-premises data centers that were serving text and images and also documents. Then Web 2.0 is when we shift into mobile broadband, essentially. So within that era, that's where we are now. We've gone to high definition images, and then of course video. And then the sort of thing that's been propelling that has been the arrival of cloud computing. But within cloud computing, you have a centralized set of cloud computing vendors, where AWS, GCP, and Azure are the big three, and then there's this sort of underlayer that make up the rest of the market. But that's still a very centralized group with like a lot of power, and then you get into all the sort of juicy antitrust arguments and whatnot. So Web 3.0 is, well, we've got centralized cloud computing. What if we decentralize the cloud computing elements and move those workloads closer to end users? So like this is where Edge and like MEC comes in, and the sort of other business argument is the likes of AWS and GCP. They don't want to start trying to build data centers in all of these tiny, minuscule, low ARPU markets. But there are like infrastructure providers there. Like there's these local networks, and increasingly they'll find ways to do things that best suit the local conditions, which these big Western firms aren't going to do very well. Not with the sort of Silicon Valley mindset. You can't just sort of stroll in and expect that to work very well. So that's the Web 3.0 arch, you end up at this point where you're able to access like a series of marketplaces where you can kind of outsource a workload, a given workload, and there has to be a way to facilitate that. And of course, that brings us into the very sort of buzzwordy blockchain angles, which yeah, I don't know how jaded are you?
No, that's fine. I mean, blockchain is blockchain. Its applications are varied.
Yeah.
I think it can sometimes be treated as a technology looking for a home. I have seen all sorts of weird and wonderful CDN related blockchain solutions out there. Some of them might merit a little bit more of an investigation. Some of them should frankly be never mentioned again. But presumably you've been tracking a few. Tell us about the sort of things you've been looking at.
Yeah, so we sort of dug around, and yeah, there's a lot of hype about IPFS, and oh yeah, you can put video data inside like chains on the block. No, I mean you could, but like just don't do that. But the things that blockchain does and is doing, because let's not forget there's all these enterprise blockchain systems that are like live, but because they're centralized, they don't really suit the you didn't need a blockchain to do it, but there we are. So and that speaks to this point. The blockchain stuff is a very good way to do ledgers, records of transactions, who did what, who is owed what, who do we fine, boot out the network for not doing. Those systems don't have to be run on a blockchain. Like that's something that can feasibly live inside something incredibly boring, like an Oracle, OSS BSS extension or something like that. Like it doesn't have to be big and shiny and buzzy, but it's there. And then similarly, there are sort of examples of DCDN services, because the first phase really is that DCDN is a way for a video service to compete with the big boys without having to pay like very large bills. And I mean, there's like AOS.tube, which just looks like YouTube, but it's delivering stuff via WebRTC, and it's got I think thousands of like 5-figure thousands nodes that are deployed, and like that's there and it's live.
So when you say delivered by WebRTC, you mean using the peer-to-peer nature of WebRTC? Okay, because WebRTC obviously can be a one-to-many and very scalable as well. So it's important to not necessarily conflate WebRTC as purely peer-to-peer, I think.
No. And I mean, I'll get confused once we go too much further into the technology stack. But like the idea there, and I think there's a lot of these companies there, there's about 30. And I mean, a lot of them are going to flame out. But the central gist is that if you can use a cryptocurrency that is tied to the same blockchain that you're doing like the ledger transactions with, the advertisers are buying in using that token. So they buy it in, they trade dollars for whatever token you want, and then you are paying the people who are hosting the video that gets served in that token. So anytime that the video stream gets watched, the person hosting the traffic, and it gets determined by which is the best route, or who currently is the best route for this viewer and this video, and it gets pushed out that way. So those systems will then, like in theory, it just encourage people to go, oh, I've got this, my old home theater PC is sitting away in my cupboard. What can I do with it? And all you need is like a blog post, and suddenly you've got like a DCDN node running, in a cupboard in a weird part of Bristol. But if you then just take that a little bit further, and you see some there's some decent parallels and growth for this kind of stuff in like IPFS, like storage that way, distributed storage. Because then if you're doing distributed storage, the next thing is, well, I'll do distributed compute, and then we're off to the races. So yeah, and then in terms of the traffic, I think we're saying 115 exabytes in 2026, which is minuscule. It's a percent roughly of total CDN traffic, but it's growing, and it's something that I think the incumbents should be examining. But similarly, you have to be fairly skeptical, because there is a lot of buzz here.
I mean, I've seen over the last few decades, I've seen numerous peer-to-peer models arrive. You know, we used to call live peer-to-peer many years ago. We used to call it application-led multicasting and so on. And the big challenge in my mind, the big challenge it's always had is you struggle to provide a QoS guarantee. So for providing premium content in that environment, you lose a degree of accountability in your QoS your proposition for the delivery of the content. I'm not sure. I can see how blockchain could be used to track assets through that value through that delivery chain and so on. I am yet to see. I'm not going to put my head under the duvet here, but I'm yet to see how the QoS challenge in peer-to-peer, other than by pure massive over provisioning, can really be addressed. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Well, so that is part of it. Is that these services should get better as they scale, and then the types of service that they can provide should improve. So once you have, your X value, then you can do VOD, and then you need a Y value, and then you can do live, and then once you get a Z value, you can do the ultra low latency stuff. And of course, if they never get enough scale to do X, then they can never do Y. So that's like a real and present danger. And any one time, the price of Bitcoin could tank, and investors and VC types will sour on the opportunity. And the whole, oh, you're doing CDN, oh, right, you're blockchain. No, you become like persona non grata, and like people won't want to go near you. But then at the same time, like as you said, and like getting people to talk to you on record about this is always difficult. But there's loads of horror stories about P2P and like how that got integrated and what went wrong and why no one uses it. But then just speaking to the quality of service part and the emerging viewers, when you have a direct like alternative to churn to or to compare it to, like in a short time we'll have 8K broadcast channels. When those exist and you want to use a different video service and it's buffery and laggy and the picture quality is not great and the audio goes out of sync, terrible, right? Terrible quality of service. But if you're like new to this and like getting a 1080p feed on a phone is like a novelty, like you've not seen it before, you have like far lower sort of quality of experience expectations. So there's a lot more sort of scope to do it with. And then similarly, like if you're trying to bring video to like emerging markets, they're going to be very like price sensitive. So then like to some extent, then like the perfect is like the enemy of the good kind of thing, or the other way around. Like you stumble trying to do the sort of experience that you would expect from a modern service now. Well, if people are watching it on like a tiny little screen, like bitrate suddenly is not such a concern. Like if we're not watching these on the best screens in the house, and if these audiences are so like fractured that you can never get the best sort of service to them, then it's a bit like a moot point. But unfortunately, there's a lot of different variables in there. So lots of caveats.
So an interesting driver, I think we've got about 3-4 minutes here just to touch on a last topic. An interesting driver for WebRTC has obviously been its ultra low latency capabilities and so on. And that's bringing out new application opportunities, I think, particularly around interactive applications and so on. And in the notes we got for today's chat, we've got AR, VR, MR, XR. There's many R's appearing and so on. Where do you see the evolution over the next 12 months within those particular apps? Is everything going to go meta? Is it going to be? Is this going to be a sweeping change?
So the big thing with like most metaverse discussions is like to get the type of experience that you see in like the pitch decks, you need like a full stereoscopic high frame rate system, and then you probably need like a way to map the room around you so that you've got a sense of your existence within that space. So when you hear things about 1 billion metaverse users, well, it can't be 1 billion of those. Like I don't think you can source all those components, and you definitely can't do it like soon. So then it's well, I need a way to represent myself, and then you're seeing the avatars. And the other part, you might get like glasses. I'd love glasses with like little cameras in that I could remember people's names via. But like that sort of stuff is an entirely different world. But then similarly, like if suddenly the glasses are a way to view like multiple different screens within like a big thing, well, you end up having like 6 different video streams, you know, and like it might be a tiny little screen and equivalent to like 144 pixels, but then you zoom in on it. That's difficult, and you need a way to support it. And I think over time, all of those different video sources that are being overlaid, because that's the promise of like mixed reality and sort of the augmented stuff, is it's like an overlay essentially. It's easy to do images, but like people will want moving, moving images, and at some point that goes from being a moving image to a video and a video stream, because like that little camera can't store all of that, video for you, so you have to stream it. But yeah, 12 months, not much, but like there's going to be all these sort of experiments with it, and being able to host those experiences closer to users is very important, because if the latency is crap, like I can't wear these things because I think I'm really sensitive to it, but I feel sick wearing one of those for about 5 minutes. And we were just talking about quality of service. You have to get it right in like full stereoscopic. And yeah, at the moment in metaverse discussions, that is the most important kind of use case. So like there's a role, I think, but similarly, like there's nothing saying that the existing CDN infrastructure couldn't do it. It's more a question of scale, I think, and like cost. So
very interesting. I've got one last question. How's the cat?
Oh, cat's good. I was afraid earlier, like I thought I'll lock him out because then he can't come in and wake us up. But he opened the door, so I went, all right, I'll go feed him. He gets 2 dinners, this cat. So he's actually been very good. He's on the desk just there. But,
wonderfully named Paddington has made
Paddington. Yeah, he's chaos. But,
listen,
sweet.
Really appreciate it, Alex. Thank you so much. The man about the industry at the moment. Definitely keep an eye on what Alex and Rethink are up to.
Yeah, thanks very much.
They've got a very good broad view of the sector, and very worthwhile keeping abreast of. So, thanks once again, Alex. Much appreciated. And
lovely stuff.
We will see you soon.
Cheers, Tom.